sexualities are something that we should be very proud of. It should be something that we should celebrate, because pleasure is our body's way of saying, I love you. So the more we can really bask in that pleasure and get rid of that shame, the happier life that we can have. Shame is healed through vulnerability. The more normalized they become, the less the shame they can feel. When you're engaging in a sexual act, you're co-creating an intimate experience. It's a symphony that we are developing as a team. There is no intimacy without authenticity. They're one and the same. You have to get comfortable with having uncomfortable conversation, because ultimately all of these things are going to lead to a stronger connection.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Home to Self podcast. I am so excited to be here with another incredible guest, someone who I've been following since recently on social media, but I'm very, very intrigued in your content, your message, just the work that you're putting out in the world. And I've been really doing this thing where I just intuitively listen to who I want to reach out to bring onto the show. And yeah, you came forward so strongly. So Jocelyn, thank you for being here. You call yourself a sexual empowerment coach for the sensually ambitious. And I love that. It's so specific, so juicy. I feel like there's so much to that. So I just kind of want to pass it over to you right from the get-go, let you introduce yourself for a moment and tell us a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for having me. I love doing podcast interviews, so this is exciting. So a sexual empowerment coach is, I go between like sex coach, intimacy coach, but sexual empowerment coach is my favorite title, because I support individuals and couples in feeling empowered in their sexuality, right? And for the sensually ambitious is for people that don't want mediocre sex, essentially, like people that are striving for more pleasure, more joy, more fulfillment in their intimate lives. And so that's what sexual empowerment for the sensually ambitious means for me. Because also I want to add, I think a lot of the sex education that we get growing up is very like protection focused, like medical focused. And I care more about the sex education that's pleasure focused, right? It's like, how can we get the most pleasure out of our bodies? So, yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. I agree. And I was actually just listening to a podcast this morning that was around these topics too. And I love that this conversation is coming out more, especially like on social media. It's becoming more normalized to talk about sex, to talk about pleasure, and to really start to recognize the correlation between pleasure and everything else in our lives, right? Like that used to be such a taboo thing, almost like a sinful topic to dive into. And now we're really starting to recognize how it is really like the fabric of being alive, I think, is being able to be like sensually awakened and empowered. And so I think this conversation is just so important. And with that said, I know that from doing a little bit of my own research about your background, I know that you came from more of a religious background, and now you're guiding women and couples into sexual empowerment. So what a shift that has happened there. And I'm so curious to hear more about that journey for you and kind of what was the turning point for you.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay. So I'm first generation Latina. My mom is from El Salvador. My dad's from Mexico. And I grew up in Los Angeles. So we spoke Spanish in the household, and, English outside. And in the household's very, very, very religious Catholic upbringing. I went to Catholic school from kinder to 12th grade. I wanted to be a nun when I was 16. I was very involved in my parish. I was an altar server. I was a lector. I even got a scholarship in 8th grade for being most involved in my church. I was in Christian leadership. In high school, I was very, very religious. But I was also a very, very like horny child. I've always been like curious about sex. I started masturbating really early. And it was just always something that I felt really ashamed about, right? Because at church and my house and my mom, she never talked to me about sex. She also had her stuff around sex. So I was always this very sexually curious child, but at the same time, very religious. And it was a very confusing time for me because I genuinely thought, oh my God, God's going to hate me if I like touch myself or if I have these sexual urges in any way, right? So when I was 16, I had my first boyfriend. And it was like a weird dynamic. I wanted to be a nun. He wanted to be a priest. but we would like do things together, and then we would be like, okay, we're gonna like do this thing. We're gonna, like, whatever. I'm gonna give you a blowjob, but like we have to go to confession this week for a whole day. We're not going to speak. We have to pray 3 rosaries. Like, it was insane because we were so scared of like the sin factor, right? So it got to a point where I was going to confession once a week, and a priest actually had to tell me, like, you're fine, you can come once a year. And I said, no, you don't understand. Like, I'm doing really bad things. Like, the shame was just horrendous. But then when I was 18 years old, I graduated high school and I met this guy. And this was the first time I had like sexual intercourse, because before that it was like other playthings, and then it was like full blown whatever, quote unquote, sex. And my boyfriend was amazing. Like, the first time we had sex, he like lit candles and incense, and we played like Bauhaus. I was really into like goth when I was in my early, just my late teens, early 20s. And I just remember being like, who the hell said this was wrong? It was with someone that I loved. The experience, I mean, the sex itself was terrible, but after like the 3rd or 4th time, I was like, oh, this is great, right? But it was such a beautiful experience for me. And I just went on this quest where I started questioning everything, where I was like, who the fuck said there's something wrong with this? This is amazing. I love this. I left the church. I became an atheist. I started getting really into like feminism and trying to understand like, you know, um, just trying to understand sexuality. Became a sex educator when I was 20 years old. And I just became very, very angry at the church, and at the same time, very passionate about seeking out my own truth, and supporting others and helping them also break free from shame and helping them embrace their sexualities. And there's much more to my story. I'm not an atheist anymore. I went through like a whole spiritual journey after that, but we can talk about that later. But that's how my sexual awakening happening, when I left the Catholic Church and just decided that Catholicism was not for me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story. It's so powerful, and I I really believe that it's the shame that has been indoctrinated into us from so many different angles, whether it's religion or anything else, that is such a block for what so many people actually desire and are like it's like our gift to be able to feel at that capacity and enjoy so much of what it is to be human and be in connection with others. And so I'm so curious to dive a little bit deeper into shame, because I'm sure you work. I mean, I'm sure that's the biggest obstacle in the way for so much of the work that you do. And so I'm so curious to hear kind of wherever you feel like taking it, but talk to us a little bit about shame and how it holds people back, and then also like how we can start working to release some of that shame that we hold around our sexuality.
So, in order for me to talk about shame, I really want to talk a little bit more about how I got to where I am now, because a lot happened in the last like 15 years from the time I left the church to where I am now. So, after I left the Catholic Church for like a period of 7 years, I just became very reckless with my sexuality, right? The pendulum swang from one extreme to the other, where I was incredibly conservative, super ashamed of my sexuality. And then I just became a total reckless person with my sexuality, meaning I was cheating on my partners. I was engaging in sex. I was like having sex with people I shouldn't have had sex with, right? But I had no moral compass. I was so angry and resentful of the church. I had no spiritual practice, right? And it all kind of came to a head about 7 years ago. I was married, and my partner caught me cheating. And I like totally hit rock bottom. I lost my job. I became just like a total shell of a person. And I joined a program called Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. So then my shame took on a completely different form, right? Where now I was ashamed of the acts that I was doing when I was, being dishonest. It was awful. I just like completely lost myself. And so going into that program and really learning how to be a person of integrity was really what like helped me heal. And also that program gave me my relationship with the higher power again, which I think is so beautiful and amazing. And so now, the last 6 years, I've been rooted in integrity, started my coaching practice. And I think that if it hadn't been for that whole process, though, I wouldn't have the understanding that I have now, right? Because there's nothing wrong with being a slut. Like, let me make that clear. I'm very pro slut. However, there is something wrong with doing it in a way that is dishonest and disrespectful to yourself and to others, right? When you're doing it in a way where you're not rooted in your own integrity, that's when things get a little sticky, right? So when it comes to shame, I think that there are different forms of shame that we can feel. And I do think that shame has a place, right? For example, like I said, if you're engaging in sexual acts that are not okay, that are actually hurting others, then yeah, you should be ashamed of yourself. That's not okay. However, if you're ashamed of your sexuality, but your sexuality is rooted in honesty and integrity, your sexuality is engaging you and other consenting adults, then by all means, everything goes and there's nothing to be ashamed of. In fact, our sexualities are something that we should be very proud of, right? So it should be something that we should celebrate because our bodies give us pleasure. And I always say pleasure is our body's way of saying, I love you, right? So the more we can really bask in that pleasure and get rid of that shame, the better, I think, the happier life that we can have. Now, a lot of the shame healing work that I do with my clients is very much derived from the teachings of Brene Brown. So I love Brene Brown. She's incredible. I don't know if you've heard of her, Lilly, or if you're familiar with her work. Yeah, cool. So Brene Brown is wonderful, and she has a lot of qualitative studies, right, that teach how we can heal shame, and that shame is healed through vulnerability, right? So a lot of what I do with my clients is provide a safe space for them to talk about the things that bring them shame and normalize those experiences, right? Because the more normalized they become, the less the shame they can feel. And the cool thing about working with a sexual empowerment coach or a sex coach is that you get to practice that with your coach before practicing that with a partner. So that's a lot of what what I do with my clients.
Yeah, it's crazy how shame just can only really live when it's in the dark, right? When it's like being suppressed, and the moment that we have a safe place where we can just express, and like so much of the work that I do with clients is similar. It's just not really in the sexual area, but I tell them, even if like you have a hard time expressing your truth, your vulnerability to someone else, like write about it. Like in any form that you can actually just start to normalize it and see it and like voice it. I just think that is so helpful. And this is a beautiful segue into kind of the next area that I wanted to go into, which is around authenticity and intimacy, right? And shame is usually what keeps us from accessing that, which is what people really want to experience more of. And I hear this a lot too, like women really wanting more intimacy, more connection, whether it's sexual or not, that like depth, that deep connection that we feel with others and with ourselves. And once we start to voice this, I think it's so beautiful, like you said, to be able to get used to normalize it, talking it to someone that you feel safe with, so that you can then communicate that to your partner, which is such a big part of the vulnerability piece that is required for deeper connection. And I've heard you say before in one of your videos that did really well about relentless authenticity, right? And how you changed your mind that is now the number one intimacy tip that you have. And so I'd love for you to dive a little bit more into like, what does that mean and why is it your number one tip for intimacy?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It was such a beautiful download that I got that day when I made that video too. So I have been a sex educator for 15 years, right? I became a sex educator when I was 20. I'm turning 35 in just a couple of days. So I used to say all the time, communication is my number one intimacy tip. You got to communicate. You got to communicate. You got to communicate. Tell your partner what you want. It's so important to communicate. But after coaching, I realized, holy smokes, a lot of my clients don't even know what to communicate, right? Or they communicate, but they communicate things that aren't true because they're trying to spare their partner's feelings. So then I was thinking to myself, okay, if so many of these people that I work with have trouble even knowing what to say because they don't know what they like, or they are communicating, right? But what they're communicating is false. It's not true, right? Or they're just simply communicating things that maybe are not an alignment. Maybe they're not lying, but it's just not in alignment. So an example could be like, you're in the middle of intimacy and your partner's doing something that you're not crazy about, right? And they say, "Oh, are you okay?" You say, "Yeah, yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Keep going. It's fine." Technically, you're communicating, right? You're communicating. You're saying, "Yeah, keep going. It's fine." But is it true? No, it's not true. You're not actually liking what's happening. So now what's happening is that you're not having a good time. You're trying to spare your partner's feelings. Your partner probably isn't having a good time either because they can feel the energy. They could see that you're not totally into what's happening. And what's happened now is that you've created this energetic block between the two of you that completely stifles intimacy, right? So there's this book called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, and I love the way that he describes integrity. And I use this quote all the time because it was really just like a revelation for me. So as humans, we describe integrity from a moral standpoint: transparency, honesty, loyalty, right? But integrity from a physics standpoint actually means when an object is whole and complete. And energy can only move through objects that are whole and complete. So when something is out of integrity, energy cannot move through it and you are not whole and complete. It's literally like putting a pebble in a hose. So if I am speaking to you and you ask me, "How are you doing?" And I say, "I'm fine," right? You're going to look at me and be like, "Clearly you are not fine because your energy and your words and your actions are not in alignment." "No, seriously, Jocelyn, what's going on?" "I'm fine." I said, "I'm fine." I have now energetically blocked us and there's no intimacy that can be created, even though my words are saying that I'm fine, right? But when I'm in integrity and you ask me, "How are you doing?" And I say, "I'm having a great day," right? My words, my energy, my actions are in alignment. Now there's energy flow between us because I'm in integrity. So I was pondering this and I thought, you know what? Communication is not a very great number one intimacy tip if people are not communicating the truth or if they don't know what to communicate. So then I thought, no, authenticity is the number one intimacy tip. And I added the word relentless, funny enough, because I'm actually going through a breakup right now. And at the time that I recorded that, it was just like in the middle of just like the emotional chaos of that relationship and just being like, what the, just like total emotional turmoil. And I realized that there was so much self abandonment that happened in that relationship that I just thought to myself, the moments where I chose authenticity, I had to be relentless about it. Meaning every cell of my being wanted me to lie. Every cell of my being wanted me to pretend everything was okay. And I just have to blurt out the words like, "I'm not okay. I'm actually very unhappy," right? And it's this relentless feeling of like, I just have to go hard on it. I have to go hard on this authenticity piece. And then I thought to myself, okay, so if intimacy means being in integrity, if you have to be authentic to create connection, you have to be fucking relentless about it. Meaning you have to learn how to sit in your partner's discomfort of what you're saying, if your truth bothers them, right? You have to be very comfortable with being uncomfortable. How do I say that? Sorry. You have to get comfortable with having uncomfortable conversations, right? Because ultimately all of these things are going to lead to a stronger connection, but you can't have the intimacy and the connection without the authenticity. It just can't happen. There is no intimacy without authenticity. They're one and the
Wow.
same, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. Thank you for explaining that so well. It's so true. I've never really thought about that, but it's so true. And like that's usually, I mean, that's why they say vulnerability also is like such a connector, right? Because it's true. To me, I've always thought of like authenticity as like honesty, as what's real in the moment, and that's what allows us to connect so deeply because there is that resonance that just like there's I always think of it as like your words, your actions, your energy, everything is coherent. It's on the same page. Yeah. And so it makes sense that the energy can then flow and it flows between the two people. And I think that can also be the hardest thing. Like it's simple, but not always easy, right? Because that's where we then come like we confront all of our shame and all the pieces that make us think that we can't be exactly as we are. We can't be truthful. We want to protect someone else. And this has all been such a huge lesson for me over the past few months too. So I'm like, wow. But yeah, I'd love to, for people, go ahead. You want to add something to that before I
Yeah,
ask
I
you the
want to
next
also
part?
just maybe give an example of how you can use
Sure.
this in really practical ways, right? So I just want to make it very clear that your pleasure matters. Whoever's listening to this, your pleasure is important. You're important, right? And it is your responsibility to advocate for that pleasure. And it is so important to do so. And there's a lot of layers when it comes to choosing an intimate partner that I don't think gets spoken about enough. Choosing an intimate partner, yes, absolutely. Someone that has a good job, someone that you're physically attracted to, someone that maybe comes from a good family, someone that, you have the same similar interests, all of that. But even more important, it's about choosing an intimate partner that you feel safe with. Can your partner receive feedback? Are you able to have these really intimate discussions? Are you able to sit in that discomfort and that truth? Because again, that's what's going to create intimacy. And if not, are you willing to learn how to do that? Right? Because once you feel that safety, once you're like, okay, my partner's a safe person, I'm a safe person for my partner, that's really where it can flourish. So, perfect example that I hear with my clients all the time, oral sex, right? Partner is performing oral sex on, my client, and I'm just not liking it. They do this thing that I'm not really crazy about. Okay, so you have a choice. You can sit there and just be like, they're having a good time, so I'm just going to let them have a good time, right? Or you can choose to say, hey, honey, I would really love it if you go a little faster. Can you go a little slower? Can you suck on my clitoris a little bit more, right? Or play with my balls or whatever, right? It doesn't matter what gender it is. And then be able to receive that, right? A partner who can receive that feedback and say, absolutely, yeah, sure, right? Because you have to understand that giving feedback and being honest is not about telling your partner they're not good enough. When you're engaging in a sexual act, you're co-creating an intimate experience. It's two people coming together and creating something beautiful. It's not about being good or bad in bed. It's about, oh, there's reciprocity here. There's back and forth. We're creating this together. It's a symphony that we are developing as a team, right? So when you look at it from that standpoint, again, that's where intimacy flourishes. Even if your partner asks you what do you like? And you just genuinely say, I actually don't know what I like. Okay, great. Let's figure it out together. Let's try different things and see what you enjoy, right? And I think that that's the most beautiful gift that you can give to yourself and a partner. And that's also the only way that you'll know whether or not you and that person are even sexually compatible. A lot of the individuals I work with will be together for 10 plus years and then finally realize, holy smokes, we're not sexually compatible. We like completely different things. So if you're listening to this and you're single or, you're dating, I just want to stress that sexual compatibility is so important. It's not something you want to ignore. It's something that you totally want to make sure that you're on the same page on. Or even if you enjoy different things, are you willing to do the things that your partner likes to start to become more sexually compatible? So yeah, just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's huge, and I want to definitely circle back to sexual compatibility, but I don't want to finish this conversation just yet because I feel like there's more here, and something that I just want to double click on that's been such a huge learning curve for me and been so powerful in my relationship has been learning how to communicate, because it makes all the difference, right? Like the way that you just said, you know, if your partner's doing something that you're not crazy about, instead of telling them stop doing that or you're doing that wrong, it's like inviting in what you do desire, right? And giving them an opportunity to actually meet you instead of, and it takes both. It takes a partner who doesn't take everything personally and doesn't automatically make it assume that, you know, they just suck at pleasuring you, but someone who's willing to co-create with you. I love that you said it was a co-creation process. That's such a, hey, we're in this together to both get better, to both receive as much pleasure as we can. And that's kind of the point, because then it can just keep getting better too. And I think that in order to actually communicate it that way, you have to also know what you like, right? Or at least be willing to explore that. And that is also part of this authenticity piece of like really being in that self-discovery process continuously in pleasure and everywhere in your life, so that you can continue to show up from a place of truth. And I think that for a lot of the women that I work with, I think that this is a part where they feel blocked in, where they don't really know who they are, what they like, and maybe haven't ever given themselves full permission to actually explore that, and definitely in this area. And so I'm so curious if you have any practical tips or practices that you share with clients for how to start like getting to know yourself deeper in these areas.
Yeah. The first step is actually thinking about it. What I notice with the women in particular that I work with is that they're so focused on their partner's pleasure that they completely forget about themselves and they don't think about themselves, right? It's so funny. I still have this memory. I remember my cousin got married a few years ago, and I was like, "Oh, hey, like, how was the wedding night?" You know? And she goes, "He's happy." And I was like, "Excuse me? I don't give a fuck about him. Did you have a good time?" You know what I mean? It was just like
Yeah.
such a weird response. I mean, okay, I don't want to judge, but you know, it was just like such a, I don't know, unexpected response,
So
right?
telling.
So telling. Yeah, I was like,
Yeah.
okay, this is interesting. Okay, so the first step is really thinking about it. Like truly asking yourself, right? Like, how do I like to be touched? How do I like to be spoken to? How do I like to be kissed? What kinds of sexual acts intrigue me? What are my fantasies? What really turns me on? Right? And I've actually created a workbook called Knowing Me, Knowing You. And this workbook has been super supportive and honestly life-changing for a lot of my clients. I literally just created it. It's like from A to Z on like a sexual experience, from like time of day to setting, right? All the way into initiating intimacy, foreplay, motion in the ocean, verbal communication, nonverbal communication, kinks, fantasies, et cetera, et cetera. And it just guides you and asks you, what do you like and what don't you like? You know, if you want to get me in the mood, this is how to do it. If this is what I'm not crazy about, right? And it's really just like having that practice of like thinking about it, like truly thinking about it, and asking yourself, what is it that I enjoy? And I think a lot of stuff, right? A lot of information comes out of that self-reflection that can be really supportive. But that's the first step. Once you get there where you start to really reflect on this is what I like and this is what I don't like, then the next step is communicating that effectively, right? But communication isn't enough, right? Comprehension is really the goal. So what's the difference between communication and comprehension? Communication is me telling you, I really like X, right? Comprehension is when your partner says, I hear you, you really like X, and then action is being taken based on the communication, right? Because what's the point of communicating if the action isn't going to come behind it, right? So comprehension is always the goal, and communication comes after the self-exploration.
I love it. Again, thank you for like making it so simple, because I think we tend to overcomplicate things. And yeah, the moment you said think about it, I'm like, yeah, I wonder how many people actually let themselves think about it, because even that act alone can feel like wrong or dirty, or I don't know. It depends what your programming is around sexuality. But yeah, I think people are pretty intuitive, and if you just give yourself a chance to actually like go there in your mind and like take some time to actually just think about it, I imagine a lot would come from that place. And the comprehension piece is huge too, because yeah, that's when it feels like it's actually a two-way street, when you're actually trying to communicate something that's especially, important and even vulnerable in that moment. And yeah, I wonder from here if we want to dive in a little bit deeper into intimacy and vulnerability, as that's kind of it all is so deeply connected. In order to communicate, we also have to be willing to be seen, to be willing to own what it is we like. And that can feel so scary, to be so seen. And I know vulnerability is something that I talk a lot about as well. And I'm just curious to hear from your perspective how we can start to step deeper into vulnerability, open ourselves up, and let ourselves actually be seen, so that, because it's both a gift to ourselves and also to others, like people who love us. It's such an honor to receive the trust of someone's vulnerability, and to then be able to meet them as a partner, especially as an intimate partner, to meet them in that desire and that pleasure. So I'm so curious how you view vulnerability, and what tips you have for people who want to open up more.
Yeah. It's important to recognize that sex is the most vulnerable act that we engage in. The most vulnerable. And I'm such a sex geek because sex is a microcosm of all things human. In sex, you bring your naked body, you bring your raw emotions. You are exposing yourself and putting yourself in some pretty compromising positions, right? Like, it is so deeply vulnerable. And so I see this direct correlation with a lot of the people that seek my support, is that their lack of sexual fulfillment is very much tied to how comfortable they are being vulnerable with their partners, right? So what is vulnerability? I think well, it's funny, if you read the definition of vulnerability, it's actually, the definition is to be susceptible for attack, which I think is kind of funny. And Brene
Whoa.
Brown talks about, yeah, I know, right? It's like, oh, like being vulnerable means you might get hurt, right? And that's essentially, I mean, that's true. And Brene
Mm-hmm.
Brown says this all the time, that for you to risk, that vulnerability is a risk, right? To be open, to be raw, to be your full self is a risk, because giving yourself to another person, you know, that's scary. You're literally saying, this is who I am, all parts of me, right? Take me or leave me. And that's really, really scary. Now, I don't make the rules, but that's also the only way that we can truly build connection and intimacy, right? So how do we do that? I would say the first thing is understanding that another big piece of vulnerability is vulnerability cannot exist without authenticity. It always comes back to authenticity, right? Because to be vulnerable is to be authentic, is to say, this is how I actually feel. This is what I actually think. These are the experiences I've had in my life, and this is why I am who I am, right? So if we can be fully authentic with ourselves, then we have the power to be vulnerable. Okay. Now, again, being vulnerable also means understanding who is safe to be vulnerable with, right? Being discerning with who you share your thoughts and your feelings to, because not everyone is entitled to your thoughts and your feelings, right? So creating safety, and if you're wondering, well, how do I know if I'm safe? Pay attention to your nervous system. How do you feel when you're around a certain person? Do you feel calm? Do you feel anxious? Do you feel at peace, or do you feel like on edge, right? Our nervous systems will never let us down. Our intuition will never let us down. And we oftentimes ignore those things because we gaslight ourselves and think, oh, we're wrong, right? Oh, I must be crazy. Everything's fine. But if someone's actions, energy, and words are not in alignment, and your body knows it. Your body can feel it, right? So pay attention to how you feel when you're with certain people. Pay attention to how you feel when you're with your partner. And if you're noticing, oh, actually, I'm really anxious with this person, there's something here, then it's something that, could be addressed, right? I do just want to say there's a little caveat, I guess one caveat is like attachment styles, right? Some people just have like an anxious attachment style. However, I do believe that certain dynamics do create secure attachment. And that dynamic is the thing that will indicate to you whether your partner is a safe person, right? So again, it just goes back to like nervous system. How do you feel? What is your intuition telling you? Okay. Now, if you're someone that is scared to be vulnerable, you've never opened your heart up, right? You've never expressed your emotions, you don't know how to do that. I love the tip that you gave earlier, and I give this to my clients too, is start writing. If you don't know who you can open yourself up, write it in a journal. This is how I feel today. And use the feelings wheel, right? Because a lot of us don't know how to express feelings. We'll say, I feel like $1,000,000. Like, well, that's not a feeling, right? I feel joyful. I feel grateful. I feel peaceful. I feel calm. I feel angry, et cetera, et cetera. Write down your feelings, right? And then pay attention to your nervous system and ask yourself, who in my life do I feel safe enough to share this with? And if you don't have anybody, therapy and coaches, right? Therapy and coaching. This is where like the power of going to therapy and hiring a coach comes in, because hopefully if you find a good therapist and a good coach, right, you'll feel safe to open yourself up to them. And this is where you take that safety to a whole new level, because journaling isn't enough. In 12-step program, actually, one of the things that they say is you do the steps, but then you read it out loud to your sponsor. And your sponsor sits there with you and says, I hear you and I see you. And guess what? I still love you, right? That's where the healing power of addiction comes in. And that's where the healing power of healing shame comes into. It's writing it out and then sharing it with someone and having someone look at you and say, guess what? I still love you. I still think you're pretty awesome, despite everything that you just shared with me. That's where the healing is. And that, oh my God, I'm getting chills just saying this, because that's what we all want, right? We all want to be able to find people in our lives that we can share our raw, authentic self with, and they'll just look at us and accept us for who we are. And that's really where the magic of intimacy happens. That's where like the beauty of it. And honestly, that's also where you have amazing sex. That's where your sex just like skyrockets to the next level, is when you're able to do that with someone. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was getting chills too while you said that, because it's like that takes it to the next level, right? It's like first even just writing it out or just like getting it out of your system is like, okay, there's already relief there. But the next level, it's like that's still your little secret. The moment that you like just let it be seen and it's received, and it's like the biggest fear is that you won't be loved, that you won't belong, right? That feeling of like rejection and abandonment because of the darkest thing that you think that no one's going to accept you for. To then that's like literally the rewiring that's happening in the mind and body when the feedback is actually still love. It's like, oh, such a release. And it's so beautiful, because that is like the deepest place for humans to connect, is like underneath all of that shame and in that vulnerability and that truth and authenticity. So yeah, I really appreciate you kind of sharing and guiding people through that, and how they can actually start to come back to themselves, get to know themselves, release the shame, share it, connect, and then through that, like deepen in intimacy. It's just like, it seems it's all so deeply connected. And the last kind of little piece here that I want to dive into before we pivot into sexual compatibility and some other topics is how can women do this around their bodies? Because I know that for a lot of women and men too, but most of my audience is women, like this disconnect that they feel from their own bodies. And, there's so many reasons for this. Partially, we live in a society that is very heady and everything is logic, structure, like think about it. And in order to have a beautiful sex life and deep intimacy and pleasure in all areas, it's like it requires us to like be connected to our bodies, our senses, right? To come down with our awareness. But that can feel so foreign and scary for different reasons. And so what little tips do you have for how to like rebuild that connection and come back and create that safety internally.
Yeah. I think there's different ways that work for different people. And I want to stress that it's a process. You can't just do this once and think, what the hell, I'm not connected to my body. Like, it's taken me years to get to where I am right now. And this is probably the most connected I've ever felt to my body. Like, it's taken me a long time to get here. So I think for anyone that feels that disconnection, just know that it's a process and to just be really patient. And as long as you keep doing the work, you'll get there. So there's different forms to get connected with your body, and everyone's different. I would say that the first, most basic, it's free, you can do it anytime, any day, meditation. Closing your eyes and doing a body scan, particularly body scan meditations, I think are really great. So a body scan meditation is sitting in silence or maybe just having some meditation music on, closing your eyes, relaxing into your breath, right? Relaxing your facial muscles, feeling into your body, slowing down your breath, breathing from your belly, right? Not shallow breaths, but really expanding your belly, contracting your belly. And doing a body scan is just literally thinking about every single part of your body. So from your toes to your feet, to your ankles, your calves, your knees, your thighs, your hips, your belly, your back, your breasts, your chest, and just literally going through each part of your body and thinking, okay, how can I relax more into this part? How can I relax my arm a little bit more? What does my forearm feel like? What does my thigh feel like? What does it feel like to think of my toe? What does my toe feel like, right? These body scan meditations are really beautiful to drop into your body and literally start thinking about every body part one at a time. The second modality that you can use to drop into your body is exercise, right? So I like to weightlift. So I weightlift a few times a week, but also yoga is amazing, stretching, going for walks, right? Doing something that involves some type of like muscular engagement is really nice to like drop into that body as well, because you can feel it. Especially I think weightlifting is really cool because that mind body connection is awesome because you're focusing on one body part and you're able to really create like that mind body connection. So exercise, choose whatever exercise you want, even Zumba, it doesn't matter. Just moving your body is a really great way to get connected with your body, right? Another modality, masturbation, touch yourself, right? Like grab a mirror, open your legs, look at your vulva, play with your clitoris, buy yourself a sex toy, right? Get a vibrator, get a dildo, watch a little bit of porn, read a little bit of erotica, and just have like some self-pleasure, touch yourself, figure out what feels good, right? The goal doesn't have to be orgasm. The goal can just simply be pleasure. But definitely taking some time to just like be with yourself and please yourself is like incredible and amazing for sexual exploration and to drop into your body, right? Other modalities that I use with my clients are what are called like somatic meditations. So it is where I'll have my clients close their eyes and guide them through a meditation with movement accompanied with that, right? So moving your body while your eyes are closed so you can feel into your body. There's one in particular that I really love doing with my clients where I have them get completely naked. And then what we do is with their eyes closed, I guide them through touching every single inch of their bodies with their hands, from the toes all the way up to their body, all the way up to the top of their head. And they actually get to touch their body, like feel what their body feels like. And it's such a beautiful healing experience to be able to actually touch your own body because you're literally touching what your partner touches, right? So it's interesting to touch yourself in that way. So that's another modality that I use. But yeah, I think to name a few, those are some really good ones to kind of start like dropping into yourself. Also, I think just like on a feelings level, checking in with yourself. You can start with doing this 3 times a day if you want to set an alarm on your phone. And just asking like, how do I feel right now? Because feelings are not in our brain. Feelings are in our body. Right? I don't know why we call therapy, quote unquote, mental health. I don't know. I think it's interesting because feelings are somatic, right? So if I'm anxious, I'm not going to feel it in my head. right? I'm probably going to feel it in my hands, maybe in my chest. My breath will become shallow. My heart might start beating a little faster. Maybe my shoulders will tighten up, right? If we're joyful or happy, maybe we'll feel like a sense of like giddiness, like, whatever in our legs. But feelings are very somatic. So even just asking yourself, how do I feel and where do I feel it, can be a very powerful tool to start getting in tune with your body.
Yeah. Again, simple, not easy, or not easy for everyone, but it is just a practice, really. It has been for me too. And it's like learning how to bring the awareness down into the actual body, into the sensations, right? Because and I used to be this way too, like when people would ask, how are you feeling or what are you feeling right now? I'd give a mental explanation of it, and it wasn't actually describing the feeling. And that's how you can kind of start to recognize when you're caught in your head and thinking about it instead of actually feeling it. And creating that mind body connection is what allows us to feel pleasure. You're like activating your senses more. And that's what sensuality is, right? It's like all your senses being heightened, being online. And the more you can do that, and that requires us to bring our awareness down, is like that's when we invite in more pleasure and more aliveness too, because to feel is to be alive, right? And to be human is to feel. And so it's just all, it's like it's our birthright, and it's so beautiful to practice that and to put intention into that. So thank you for giving some practical advice too. And I love the touching, like just like actually touching different parts of your body, because I think it helps to draw that connection, to bring the awareness down to the part of the body that normally it's like,
Really cool practice.
yeah. I even tell my clients for just safety to actually just like give yourself a hug or a hand on the heart, hand on the belly. Like I just don't think we touch ourselves enough, whether that's literally for safety or for pleasure, like more touch. It's such a important part.
Yeah, I love it.
Beautiful. Okay, so from here, like I said, I wanted to circle back to sexual compatibility because it's something that you mentioned earlier. I think it's an important conversation, and I'm still learning about this too. And I'm curious to hear if I'm curious to hear how you describe sexual compatibility, how you can break it down. And I'm wondering if you use like erotic blueprints in that, or if you've heard of that.
Kira, right? Is that her name?
Yeah, I think
Oh,
so. It's like sensual, energetic, sexual. I forget what the other ones are. But that's been like a more recent understanding in my life. And so, yeah, I just want to pass it over to you and hear you talk a little bit more about sexual compatibility and if you correlate it at all to that.
Yeah, I've used the erotic blueprints. I think it's a wonderful tool, especially to like simplify it for my clients, right? Because they'll be like, we're not connecting. And then they'll realize, oh, because they both respond to intimacy completely differently, and they're not meeting in the middle. Okay, so sexual compatibility is like outrageously important. It's so important, and it's something that's very what's the word? Underrated, I guess is the word. It's just a very underrated part of a romantic relationship. Like sexual compatibility is so important. So what does it mean? I don't even think sexual compatibility means that we like the same things, right? You don't have to like the same things as your partner. But sexual compatibility comes down to, do I understand what my partner enjoys? Do I understand what I enjoy? And am I open and willing to catering things for my partner's enjoyment? And is my partner open and willing to doing the same? Right? Because there's a lot of times where I've worked with couples where there's this idea of what I think you should like and who you actually are, right? So, for example, I actually just had a session yesterday with a couple where it was such a simple thing, but it really can create disconnection if you're not careful. So he was touching her waist. And she said, I told you, don't touch my waist. I'm so sorry, my alarm went off. Give me 1 second.
No worries.
It's my Intermittent fasting alarm. I can eat now. Okay. So he wanted to touch her waist, and she said, when you touch my waist, I'm very ticklish there. I don't like it when you touch my waist. Can you try touching other parts of my body first before you go straight to my waist? And he goes, well, for me, touching the waist is a very normal part to touch. So completely ignored what she said, stayed with his idea of, well, in my mind, touching your waist is normal, so I'm just going to keep doing it. That's incompatible. Now you're not being compatible because you're not listening to what your partner is telling you, right? So a lot of compatibility is also, am I okay with being in a relationship with someone who has these particular preferences? Because that matters, right? If you don't like being touched on your waist and your partner likes it, then there needs to be kind of like, okay, are we just okay with this being a thing that's going to happen in our relationship? Or actually, I want someone who I would really prefer to be in a relationship with someone who allows me to touch their waist. Or I would really like to be in a relationship with someone who doesn't make such a big deal about my preferences, right? Now, obviously, it's give or take, okay? Like, this is a silly example about the waist thing. It's not that big of a deal, right? But for some people, it could be. But in this situation, it wasn't. It was just kind of like a communication, you know, disconnect or whatever. But this is where the self-exploration becomes so important, because you have to ask yourself the question, what are my non-negotiables in my sexual expression, and where can I be a little flexible? And then it's about finding someone who aligns with your non-negotiables, and also the flexibility piece, you're like comfortable with it, right? So for example, I have another couple client that I worked with that recently started swinging. And we had a lot of conversations. Like, I mediated tons of conversations between them, because it was really kind of they were at a crossroads in their marriage, right? Where it was really like, one of them was like, I don't think I can give this up. Like, I really think that being in an open marriage is important to me. And the other person had to do a lot of self-reflection, a lot of soul searching. And I reminded them over and over again, if this is not what you want to do, it is okay, but you have to be honest with yourself. And the other person said, I'm sorry, this is something that's really important to me. And so through tons of conversations and soul searching and all the things, they finally decided to go to a swingers club. They both had a blast, and now they go like on a regular basis. It's funny, they still message me to this day telling me all about their sex capades, right? Like, but it took a long time to realize, like, are we compatible in this way? Right? And sometimes that's not the case sometimes. And I actually have another client who got divorced from his wife because he discovered he was polyamorous. And he said, I think this is a non-negotiable for me. And she said, I can't do that. And so they parted ways, right? So it's really important to understand, especially if you're like, if you are monogamous, like if you're going to be with this person potentially for the rest of your life, like you got to make sure the sex is going to be great with them. You got to make sure that you're going to enjoy that sex. You're going to be sexually fulfilled, right? So choosing someone that you're compatible with, meaning choosing someone who is open and willing to giving you the things that you desire sexually, that has flexibility, that makes you feel safe, that their desires are things that you feel you can fulfill, right? And that the things that are maybe, you know, you're not compatible about are not that important to you. And that takes time to develop. You know, that takes time to understand. So I hope I explained that well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much to look at. And I think that at the end of the day, it's all information you can use to create an experience, create a partnership that is more in alignment with what you actually desire. And it's beautiful that so much of it can start within ourselves. You know,
Yeah.
like this can happen way before you ever meet someone that you actually want to explore this with. And that's the beauty of it. And I think the healthiest way for it all to happen is to happen simultaneously, that you never stop exploring yourself because you keep evolving and you're pleasures and needs and desires might shift over time. And then also to continuously be willing to step into vulnerability and practice speaking truth and communicating. Like that's so much of it. And so, yeah, I really appreciate you kind of breaking that down more. And now it's, I think it's something that we're not taught to think about when we enter into a relationship. It's like a lot of other values take priority, but like sexual compatibility just doesn't seem, and especially I'm like curious to hear, because like at the beginning, I feel like a lot of people, like a conversation that I've had with a client before too, is like the difference between just chemistry and then actually looking like, are our values actually aligned for partnership? And so I'm not sure what the exact question would be there, but I'm just curious to hear if anything comes up for you around the difference there and what we should be paying attention to.
Yeah. Real quick, I wanted to go back to say one more thing about the compatibility piece before we talk about that. I think another important question for us to ask ourselves is, how important is sex to me? Because for some people, sex is very important, and for some people, it's not. And I think the more honest you can be with yourself and be like, sex is actually not that important to me. I'm not a very sexual person. I can be happy with having sex once a month and like, cool. You got to be real with yourself, because mismatched libidos, I would say, is the number one like issue that a lot of my clients deal with. Is one person has a higher sex drive, the other person could care less. And a lot of times, so sometimes it is due to like, resentments in the relationship or stress from work, things that we can actually resolve, right? And sometimes, that is what it is. But a lot of times it's just simply, it's just not who I am. I've never been that way. Sex isn't that important to me, right? And then the other person saying, well, I'm very sexual. In the beginning of our relationship, we had sex all the time, and then suddenly it stopped, right? So understanding like how important is this to me, and then just keeping it real with the person that you're dating so that you're on the same page, super duper important. Okay, so chemistry and values. Yeah. So, look, I get it. Some people do fall in love, like have love at first sight, like get into relationships really quickly, and it works. But in my experiences of what I've seen is that the slower you can get to know someone, the better, right? I do this activity with my clients called the manifestation station. Some people are against it. I am not, because I think it creates a lot of clarity, and I think it's a really beautiful tool. So the manifestation station is where you take a piece of paper and you write down a list of qualities and characteristics in a partner that you desire. And then you rate those qualities and characteristics on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being most important, 1 being you can take it or leave it, right? Then you compare yourself against that list. And the goal is to have all or most of the things on that list, because we don't attract who we are. We don't attract what we want. We attract who we are, right? We can only become an energetic match to the person that we are at that given time in any time of our lives, right? So in order to become that energetic match, we need to say, okay, what do I want in a partner? And how much are these qualities and characteristics do I already have? Do I already possess? And if there's some that I don't, can I work towards them? Right? So then you start becoming energetic matches to everyone you meet. It's funny right now that I'm going through this breakup. I'm like, I mean, I'm better now, but it was funny. Like a few weeks ago, I'm like, I don't trust anyone who vibes with me at this time, because I am just a ball of grief and sadness and anxiety, right? So if you're a ball, like, this is why I think people like get love bombed or, fall into these like fucked up situations when they're in vulnerable places, because again, you are an energetic match to who you are at that time. So I was like, I don't trust anybody. Like if a guy would hit on me, I'm like, don't trust it. I don't trust you. Not because of him, but because of me, because I knew what was going on inside of me, right? So understanding qualities and characteristics you want, how can I become an energetic match? How can I become these things that I desire, is really going to help a lot with understanding, is this chemistry or is this like, are our values really aligned? And also taking it slow, just being very clear, like, what are the values that I really like appreciate, and how can I slowly get to know this person so I can truly see who they are. And of course, seeing them in different settings, seeing them like, how are they with their family? How are they with their friends? How are they at work? Right. When I bring up a concern, are they receptive? Are they able to have a conversation about it, or do they become defensive? Right? Do I become defensive? If I become defensive, maybe that's something I need to work on. Right? So that's just a few ways in which we can kind of figure out the differences between those two. Also, if it feels really intense, like if you're feeling like this like intense feeling in your body, run the other way, right? There's a difference between intensity and intimacy, and we very much confuse intensity with intimacy, especially when we're excited about someone that we meet. We go into fantasy land, and then we start to, attribute really like magical qualities to someone that we just met, and that's just a recipe for disaster. So taking things slow, understanding where your energy is so that you know what energy you're attracting, and just being clear on what it is that you desire is really important.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And I also just wanted to also like double click on what you said earlier, which is how does your body feel, your nervous system around this person, I think can be huge too. Because there is a sense of like safety that just you feel in the body when you're around someone who you somatically kind of resonate with. And so there's so much wisdom to be felt from the body. And that's also why so many of these practices are so beautiful, because you're reconnecting to more senses to come online, to have more information to work with, to help you navigate. And so I love that. And I have two more little pieces. I know we're almost an hour in. I feel like I could talk to you forever, but we'll start wrapping it up. But I just have kind of two more questions for you that I want to dive into. We don't have to go super deep, but sensuality, especially for women. So many women want that. They want to be more sexually embodied, more sensual in their expression, feel more sexy, more beautiful. But there's like, it feels like such a block for a lot of women who, depending on their upbringing, right? For me, like I grew up in Costa Rica where sexuality for women especially was a lot more normal. Wearing thong bikinis at the beach at like 15 years old, like that was just normal. And so, especially coming to America later, and even like all the girls, like we always showered together naked, and it like wasn't weird. And then I got to college and I was like, whoa, women here are so much more like closed off, even around other women. So it's just so interesting. But I know that there's a deep desire there for a lot of women, but they don't really know how to step into that. And I'm just curious to hear, how do we start taking the first steps to embodying our sensuality more?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very important. First thing to know is that sensuality is not a one size fits all. Mm-hmm. Sensuality, like a thong bikini might not be sensuality for everyone. Lingerie might not be sensuality for everyone. So let me tell you a story. When I started my coaching practice and I had like my first photo shoot, my first professional photo shoot for my website and everything, I would take pictures, and all my pictures were me with like sultry looks. I was, whatever, just like I'm being sexy. I'm a sex coach, right? And I looked at the pictures and it just didn't feel authentic. I remember looking at them being like, this doesn't feel like me. Like I don't think I'm a sultry person, right? So then I asked myself the question, what makes me feel sexy? And the first thing that popped into my head was laughter. I'm like, I love laughing. I love, like, if you go on my website and you see all my pictures, most of them, it's me laughing, me smiling, me just, I'm always smiling. I love laughing. I feel sexy when I'm laughing, when I'm dancing, when I'm having a great time. That for me is my sensuality. That's my sexuality, right? Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is that once I allowed myself to be a little more authentic, I'm like, okay, like this is me, the joyful, sexy Jocelyn, right? Then the sultry actually started becoming a little more comfortable. Because then I was like, oh, I can be like, I can like laughter and sultry, like they can go hand in hand. I don't need to choose one without the other, right? So I think the first thing to ask yourself is, what makes me feel sexy? Is it lingerie? Maybe it's not. Is it when I'm dancing alone at home? Maybe. Is it when I ride my motorcycle? Maybe you ride a motorcycle and whenever you put that helmet on, you're like, fuck, I feel so fucking hot right now, right? Maybe it's when you wear high heels. Maybe it's where you wear, gym clothes and you're like lifting weights. Like, so it doesn't matter. Sensuality is not a one size fits all. You need to understand what makes me feel sexy. And I think once a woman can answer that for themselves, then go with that. Okay, so go for it full force, right? Well, I feel really sexy when I wear like a cute little pajamas and I eat chocolate and strawberries. Okay, great. Then do that more often. Do that every evening if you can. Do that at the very least twice a week, right? One thing I started doing is showering with candlelight. So I turn the lights off in my bathroom and I light a candle and I shower like that. And I do that almost every day now and I love it. Or sometimes I bought little twinkle lights. So I'll turn the lights off and I'll use the twinkle lights instead. But that makes me feel sexy and sensual, right? So it's like a little spa shower. So you're taking a shower like you normally would, but you're just setting the tone for it, right? So asking yourself what makes me feel sexy and then doing those things on a daily basis. Now, I think it's also important to understand the differences between like, that's not who I am versus I'd like to be like that. I would like to get comfortable with that. If that's the energy, then get the hell out of your comfort zone, get the hell out of your way, be courageous enough to do something new and see how you like it. Go to the local sex shop and buy yourself a piece of lingerie. Get yourself a couple of 6-inch stilettos. Take a burlesque class, right? Take a pole dancing class. Hire a sex coach, right? Do whatever you got to do to get yourself out of your comfort zone. And if that is something that you want to strive for, then try it out. Confidence doesn't come from a mindset shift. Confidence comes by doing uncomfortable things a million times until they become comfortable. So if the thought of something scares you, but it excites you at the same time, that's an indication that you got to do it. And the more you do it, the more confident you'll become.
Perfectly said. Yeah. Okay, within this, I'm curious to hear, how do you differentiate sensuality and sexuality? Because I think that that's also a conversation of like, when I'm like all the like the candles and everything that like activates my senses is like that. I think is such a beautiful feminine quality of like being online and having all of our senses that can really like feel through all the little details and be receptive to pleasure in that sense. But then I think of sexuality and I'm like, yeah, what makes me feel sexy? And I love that you, again, this comes back to authenticity. It's like uniquely you, what makes you feel sexy, and it's literally different. And I think that the more connected you are to that, the more you can actually embody it, and then it's true, and then that allows you to be like that magnetic being because you're in your authenticity and you're claiming it. But so, yeah, curious to hear the difference between sensuality and sexuality in your eyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so like I said in the beginning, sensuality for me is about pleasure through the senses.
Mm.
And that doesn't necessarily have to be sexual. It doesn't technically turn me on to light a candle and shower in darkness, but it does make me feel sensual. And it does in a way make me feel sexy, actually, but it doesn't elicit a sexual response, right? So for me, sensuality is indulging in pleasure through the senses: smell, touch, feel. Like, when I lived in Mexico, I used to go to play parties a lot. This was like a long time ago. And it was with a group of friends and they were amazing. They were a group of like poly people from Sweden. We had so much fun. And like, I think once I can remember someone had sex, but most of the time it was like pure sensuality. I remember we like gave each other massages. One time, all five of us got naked and like doused ourselves in baby powder and rubbed all over each other. It was so much fun. One time we got naked and painted like neon glow in the dark paints all over us. And just like the feeling of the cold paint on your body,
Mm-hmm.
just that feeling of like rubbing up against someone who's like has baby powder on their skin. It was like pure ecstasy. We would like feed each other fruit. It was just like, it was amazing. It was just like, and yeah, sometimes you would get turned on, but it was just pleasure through the senses. And that's the thing. A lot of times we don't allow ourselves to just feel pleasure. Like, if you eat a chocolate, like, God, it's so delicious, right? When you kiss your partner, like, oh, yummy, right? When you're in a convertible or you're in your car and you open the window and you just feel the air like run through your head, like, oh, like the wind blowing through your hair just feels great, right? How many times do we just stop and just appreciate the pleasure that our bodies offer us? For me, that's sensuality. I think other people have
Mm-hmm.
other definitions, but for me, that's what sensuality is. Sexuality is that sexual energy, right? The thing that arouses you sexually, that tingling sensation that you feel in your body, right? That goes all the way down to your groin. That for me is sexuality. And allowing yourself to feel that sexual sensation. And sometimes sexuality can also be elicited through sensuality, but not always, right? I think that you can have both without the other. You can be sexy without being sensual. You can also be sensual without being sexy. But
Mm-hmm.
sexuality is when the blood flows down to the groin, or you feel that sexual response, right? You feel that sexual charge and you get like that tingling sensation in your body. So for me, sexuality is much more about that than it is about just like indulging in the senses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I love that there is space to differentiate between the two because I think they're both super important, and especially for women. And there's room to ask yourself both questions, like what makes you feel sexy and aroused, and what makes you feel like sensual and open and alive and just
That's the
pleasurable.
word.
It doesn't, huh?
Alive. That's the
Mm-hmm.
word. For me, sensuality is aliveness.
Yes, me too. Yeah, and it's like it's so funny because like the whole erotic blueprint thing, I have like recently I'm 30, I'm almost 31 and I just recently discovered that like my erotic blueprint is first sensual then energetic. And I'm like I never really
Mm.
even knew that. And now I'm like that makes so much sense. Like just the way that I feel music and like a sunset and everything that brings my senses to life. I'm like to me it is very connected with my sexuality, but it doesn't have to be. But it's like just even knowing that about yourself is huge because now you can not only like make your own existence more pleasurable by actually like focusing on that, but you can also communicate that to the people you love. And yeah, it's exciting to know. So I love this whole conversation about just the permission slip to explore that and communicate it and like be courageous in owning it and sharing it and just having a conversation around it. It's so important. So I just want to say thank you so much for sharing all of this. And if there's anything else that you're feeling called to share as we wrap up and before you tell people how they can connect with you and work with you, feel free to do that.
I think the biggest thing I want to share is sometimes stepping into the most sensual and sexually alive version of you means having to leave things and people behind. And that might feel scary, but your life is way too short to not fully indulge in all of the pleasure that your body has to offer you.
Beautiful. I couldn't agree more. This life goes way too quick, and we're here to experience the most aliveness we possibly can, and pleasure is the thing for that. So, yeah, no shame, and it gets to be an exploration and a journey. So, thank you for doing this work and being a permission slip for others. It's felt like I can feel your comfortability in your own body and your safety in having these conversations and how normal it is. And it's just the permission slip that gives others is so needed in the world. And so thank you. And yeah, let people know how they can connect with you and work with you if they're interested.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was lovely. I just got out of the gym right now, so I was like rushing here, but I'm really grateful that we got to make this happen. Yeah, so you can find me. My website is www.jocelynsilva.com. There's information on who I am, what I do, how you can work with me, and my Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube is at I am Jocelyn Silva. Oh, I also have a podcast. I just started again. It's called The Fearful Goddess. I just did an episode on the gift of no contact. Today is day 42 for me, no contact from my ex. And I just talking a lot about heartbreak healing. And so, yeah, if that's something you're interested in, you can check that out as well.
That's perfect, because the last question I was going to dive into if we had time, but I think we talked about plenty today was breakups and how you're navigating all that. So I think that's a great place to just send people if they want to hear more about your story and insights that you have through that. And also that's been really powerful for you to share so openly, because I know a lot of people go through that in silence. And so yeah, I'm grateful, and I will include all your links below for people to access that in an easy way. And other than that, thank you so much for coming on. This conversation has been so juicy and so important. So thank you. And thank you everyone for tuning in.
Thanks for having me.
We will see you next time. Bye everyone.